Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the CPPR Dialogue. I am Afia, and I am your host today. CPPR Dialogue is a webinar series by the Center for Public Policy Research to spark thoughtful conversations on critical policy issues shaping our society. Through each session, we aim to bring together experts, practitioners, and change makers to explore challenges, share insights, and build pathways towards impactful solutions. Today, in this webinar, we focus on a topic that sits at the intersection of education reforms, regulation, and equity. National education policy at 5, budget schools and the regulatory landscape assessing progress, challenges, and future directions. In July 2020, the National Education Policy was introduced as a landmark framework aiming to transform India's education system from preschool to higher education. From its most important promises was a shift in how schools are governed. Among its most important promises was a shift in how schools are governed. It suggested moving away from rigid, input-based norms to more flexible, outcome-driven approaches. Some aspects of the policy, like curriculum changes and foundational literacy programs, have begun to take shape. But when it comes to how schools are regulated and recognized, we are still largely following the old books. This gap becomes especially visible when we look at low-fee private schools. There are schools that millions of families from low and middle-income communities rely on, not out of luxury, but necessity. They often run in small rented buildings with limited budgets from the low fee they are charging, but a strong commitment to their students. In fact, low-fee private schools now educate the majority of children in private schools as much as 70 to 85%, and play an even bigger role in states where private enrollment crosses 50%. Yet these schools are still expected to meet rigid rules like a large land area, permanent buildings, hiring only teachers with specific degrees, even when they are doing their best in rented spaces with the limited means. The standards often feel far removed from the day-to-day realities they face. At the same time, learning outcomes across the country remain worryingly low. According to the recently published National Assessment Survey Report 2024, only 29% of grade 6 students could solve a basic fraction. And this isn't just a problem in low-fee private school. It reflects a broader system-wide challenges that affect schools of every kind. National Education Policy 2020 rightly identified these flaws and proposed a major reform, the creation of State School Standard Authority, an independent body meant to focus school regulation on student learning and continuous improvement, not just complaints with inputs. This vision was clear, yet 5 years later, no state has fully implemented triple essays, and school regulations remain tangled in outdated norms under multiple state acts. So today, in this discussion, we will focus on few key areas. What are the real drivers of student learning in our schools? Why do we continue to follow regulatory rules that prioritize buildings and paperwork over children's actual progress? And ultimately, how can we finally bring the national education policy vision to life? Through this dialogue, we hope to unpack the themes and explore practical forward-looking solutions. With that, let's move on to introducing our speaker and moderator for the session. We are deeply honored to have with us today Professor Geeta Gandhi as our distinguished speaker. Geeta ma'am is a professor at the Institute of Education, University College London, where she holds the chair of Education and International Development. She was a research fellow at the Department of Economics, University of Oxford for 10 years. Professor Kington has advised global development and donor agencies like the World Bank, European Union and UK Aid, and has been a frequent advisor to both central and state governments in India. She served on a 7-member expert group at Niti Aayog for school education, and she has been a member of MHRD's Joint review missions of public education programs Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, and is a member of Uttar Pradesh Secondary Education Board. Now, she also serves as the president of City Montessori School, Lucknow. A warm welcome to you, ma'am. We are really looking forward to hearing from you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this warm welcome and for the opportunity to share, a few of my thoughts on budget private schools and the contributions that they make and the challenges that they face.
We're also pleased to have Ms. Missy Solomon, Honorable Trustee, Research and Programs at the Center for Public Policy Research, joining us today as the moderator for this session. Missy leads CPPR's research initiatives across education, health, mobility, and livelihoods with a strong focus on governance and public policy reform. She holds master's degrees in economics and public policy. I welcome Missy to moderate the session.
Thank you, Afia, and thank you so much, Geeta ma'am, for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And through this conversation, we are hoping to unpack some of the critical issues that that the Indian education is seeing today, and particularly we would like to focus on the budget private schools and the regulatory environment in which they operate. In your body of research, which is very much grounded on empirical research and evidence, one of the consistent findings across your work is that private schools, even after controlling for social, economic, and demographic factors, tend to deliver better learning outcomes when compared to government schools. And notably, many of these schools are low-fee private schools. But even as private schools do perform better, they only do marginally better. The absolute learning levels still remain low across all school types. So I want to begin by understanding what, in your view, is holding back education quality in India across these school types, and what sort of needs to be done to raise the overall floor of education achievement. Over to you.
What holds back learning achievement in India? And you're quite right that, even if we just take, when we compare private school from, first of all, data has only become available in India in order to be able to look at what is happening to children's learning levels. From about the year 2006-07, for the first time, the Annual Status of Education report was able to illuminate this question. And for the first time, it was available both for government schools and private schools. So data is absolutely key in order to understand the whole landscape. Now, you are absolutely right that when we see that, yes, when we look at raw data, for example, without any adjustment for socioeconomic background of students, we do see that there is a very big difference between government schools and private schools in many states. And there's a smaller difference in other states. But it is not fair to compare private and public school achievements without adjusting for socioeconomic background, because children of different kinds of backgrounds go to these schools. When sophisticated econometric techniques, etc., are used in order to adjust for socioeconomic background of students, then it is found that the gap is quite narrowed. The big public-private gap in achievement is narrowed when you take account of the fact that the more children from more educated homes go to private schools. So the advantage that they have in their learning by having educated parents needs to be netted out first, rather than attributing all of their achievement advantage over government school children to the effect of the private school alone. So now question is that, fine, so they're not doing so very well either. If you look at the Annual Status of Education report, even children attending private schools, for example, supposing 40% of those children of grade 5 that are studying in private schools know a grade 3 level, mathematics, for instance. So it may be that is 10 percentage points higher than in government schools. So in government schools, maybe 25% or 30% of the children know. And in private schools, if 40% know, then that may be called better outcome. But in fact, even 40% of children of grade 5 knowing grade 3 material is not good achievement. So your question is, what is it that holds children back? Well, I think that one thing to acknowledge is that this is a phenomenon that is global. It is not in India alone. That learning achievement levels, if the bar is set here, the curriculum expectation is here for, let's say, grade 5 children. Achievement of, it's not the case that in most of the countries, most of the children do achieve that level. Achievement levels tend to be lower. As to what those reasons are, I'm not very sure. But I think one of the factors, of course, there will be home background factors. What causes achievement level or learning level in a child is the product of a whole range of factors: home background factors, teachers, and school factors. School management or school, leadership as well comes into it. Pedagogy, assessments, and curriculum comes into it, and that is why our national education policy has got some really. It has done a rethink about how to teach children such that they will learn, and that the learning that they do will be of kind that is needed for today's success in today's world. Because another aspect of your question is, I mean, you may not have said that in that way, but the point is that is the kind of ASSER type of a test, or even the National Achievement Survey, the NCERT's National Achievement Survey or NAS test, and these state equivalents could be State Learning Achievement Survey, SLAS, and so on. They're called different things, but essentially, any of these tests of children's learning achievement levels, they are, testing basic cognitive skills of literacy and numeracy. But that is a very limited goal of what education must achieve, because education has to do so much more than just provide basic literacy and numeracy, although it's not even providing that much. So, when we talk about higher expectations from education, we balk a bit. But the truth is that if you look at, what is really needed in society is not just basic literacy and numeracy. Children need more depth. They need more learn with understanding. They need conceptual clarity. They need problem solving skills. They need to be able to apply their knowledge to real world problems rather than just having theoretical knowledge. So we are at a very rudimentary stage of where we need to be ultimately. So I think the national education policy does talk about several of those things that need to be rectified in order to boost education levels. Now, one of the things that holds back learning achievement levels is because our own emphasis has been at the level of policy. Our emphasis has been on when we talk about what constitutes quality. For example, if you look at the Right to Education Act, as the colleague here who was introducing just now, inputs focus. There has been in the post-independence period up to now, until this national education policy has come, an overwhelming emphasis that schools' quality will be judged by how much inputs they have. Do they have these basic minimum infrastructural facilities available there? And of course, though the availability of those facilities is extremely important, even for the safety and security of the children. So no cudgels with that. But it needed to go beyond inputs, beyond just, is there drinking water? Is there a functioning toilet? And are there blackboards? And is there a ramp? Beyond that, we also needed to focus on outcomes. And when the ASSER survey, the Annual Status of Education Report surveys, started to highlight the issue of low learning levels, that is when people's attention began to be drawn to the fact that learning needs attention, learning outcomes need attention. We should not be focusing only on inputs into the education system, like teacher qualifications, whether the teacher has got a BA and a certification of B.Ed and things like that. Those are all inputs. They may be important, although there is a whole evidence on that, and we can talk about that separately.
Yeah, just to follow up on your insights, NEP has extensively focused on moving away from rote learning to competency-based learning, and many states have attempted to redesign their curriculum, aligning with NEP, but it also appears that curriculum changes are advancing more quickly than teacher development and teacher training itself. So my line of inquiry is whether the curriculum changes translating meaningfully into classroom innovation, or is it still lagging behind due to factors like insufficient teacher development? What's the status of implementation, and how is this even, turning out to be on the ground?
Mhm. Actually, you're absolutely right. I think to focus on this question of whether curriculum change in and of itself will lead to change in outcomes of children unless it is backed up by and buttressed by teacher preparation, teacher training in that new curriculum, revised curriculum, better curriculum, enriched curriculum. That's got to be an important point. Now, we have some sort of a track record of not really going for teacher training at the same time when we change the curriculum. The NCERT books are absolutely, very good. By all accounts that I have heard, the books themselves are really excellent. But when we have introduced certain changes, were the teachers trained? That is not certain. When, for example, the CBSE board introduced CCE, continuous and comprehensive evaluation, it was introduced partway through the school year, and there was no immediate or prior training. And yet the program was rolled out. So I think we do need more thought about how to make a success of the good, the initiative of changing the curriculum, having a curriculum that is not theoretical, having a curriculum that has a connect with the real world, all of and revised textbooks, better textbooks, all of that is curriculum, even curriculum enrichment, how to make the curriculum that is more, for example, experiential learning based, project based, integrated learning based. All of these are concepts that come out of the national education policy for curriculum. These are the ideas. And yet, I'm not very aware of a lot of work. I mean, there is some work, but I think that there's far more work on foundational literacy and numeracy efforts, for children aged 3 to 7. And I'm not sure that there is a lot of work that's going on in terms of teacher training and teacher preparation.
So you've briefly mentioned about teacher qualification in itself, and I wanted to probe further on that. The NEP and Ministry of Education has persistently flagged teacher deficit, and they've put the figure to be 1.2 million, vacancies open for teachers. There are CAG audits that says that maybe the number is slightly inflated, but assuming that there is still a genuine shortage of teachers, I was wondering, is it time to rethink the way in which we're looking at teacher qualifications? Because our field interactions with some of the budget school founders in the southern Indian state reveal that most teachers are contract teachers who do not really meet the formal qualifications because one, qualified teachers are difficult to get, two, they are expensive, and even if they are employed, the retention is low because there could be more opportunities for them to get recruited elsewhere. So, in such a scenario, what could be done to attract more candidates to the teaching profession, but also ensuring quality? Are we looking at teacher qualifications in the way we should, be really looking at?
So you've raised a number of issues. I'll take the issue. I'll take up the issue of the contract teachers. There has been, again, based on the inputs-based approach, that there has been a presumption that if a teacher does not have a teacher training qualification, for example, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, is called a Basic Training Certificate (BTC) qualification, or it could be a DLEd, a diploma in elementary education, or it could be a BEd, Bachelor of Education. That unless a teacher has these, that she will necessarily be less effective as a teacher. There's been a presumption that one should have training, and a lot of the time the contract teachers do not have that piece of paper. But there's also been some, a lot of unease about the quality of those BEd qualifications because everybody knows that affiliations were given to a lot of so-called teacher training colleges, thousands upon thousands of teacher training colleges, which were not that existed, not very. They were not very properly constituted institutions, and there was a lot of bungling and so on. It's in the popular press. This is what there's no scholarly study that supports this, but there is this idea that a lot of the teacher training institutions have not produced good results. And the reason why I say this is because if you look at, for example, the performance of teachers in the TET, the teacher eligibility test. Now, the teacher eligibility test, the pass rates of existing teachers, people who have already got B.Eds and everything, the pass rate in the TET test for existing, serving, currently working teachers, in many different states, in various different states, has been extremely low. In the early years of the TET, 2012, 2014, that sort of time, the pass rates were abysmal, like 1.6% of the teachers who take it who pass, or even lesser than, in some states, I think it's something like in Tamil Nadu, 0.37%. Really, of course, the number of people who take this test is massive. For example, the Bihar TET, 26 lakh teachers took it, So 10% is, 2.6 lakh. And, 1% is 26,000. So one of the questions that arose was, why are teachers not able to pass the TET? And in Parliament, one of the answers that was given when this question was raised was that, our teacher training institutions, the Ministry of Education stated that our teacher training institutions are not doing a good job. So I think this, what is the value of a piece of paper that says that you have a B.Ed, but which, doesn't equip you to teach well enough that you can pass the teacher eligibility test? And yet contract teachers are supposed, it is supposed that contract teachers will be less effective than regular teachers because they do not have that qualification. Although in one of my studies, I have a paper in the Economic and Political Weekly in 2010, which looks at the relative effectiveness of para teachers and regular teachers in 2 Indian states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And when you look at the data, it shows that the children, first of all, it shows that the educational qualifications of para teachers, the contract teachers, is, if anything, slightly higher, slightly better than the educational qualifications of regular teachers. And the reason for that is that these are the more recent graduates who have been recruited into the teaching profession as contract teachers, whereas the regular teachers were appointees from an older time. So their educational qualifications tended to be lower. The more recent, younger crop of applicants for teaching jobs have higher educational qualifications in terms of, master's degrees and so forth. So educational qualifications are typically somewhat better among contract teachers than regular teachers, but they tend to have B.Ed, etc., at a much lower level than regular teachers. So there is a presumption that they must be less effective, partly also because they are paid a lot lesser than regular teachers. But there are 3 different studies of the relative effectiveness of contract teachers and regular teachers in India for 3 different states and by 3 different researchers. And all 3 of them show that the children taught by contract teachers, their achievement levels are no lesser than the achievement levels of children who are taught by regular teachers. And in 1 or 2 cases, the achievement level was even higher, statistically significantly higher than the achievement levels of children taught by regular teachers. So it's perhaps not so surprising. It is perhaps not so surprising because contract teachers are also local teachers. They are typically recruited from the same village or very close by to the village. And so it is one of the reasons why it could be that they appear to be more effective is because one of the things we did in our study of 2 states, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, was that we looked at the teacher attendance rates. And the teacher absence rates of regular teachers were 24%, and the absence rate of contract teachers was about 12%. So it could be that they're more present in school, and that's why their children are learning, if anything, slightly better.
Right. NEP also focuses heavily on teacher qualification, B.Ed and PET. And I was wondering if given the shortage that we see in teacher training, is there any other way forward when it comes to looking at teacher qualifications? Like, is there an alternate way of integrating people who are educated but may not be formally trained? So, has there been any suggestions on that front?
I mean, the contract teacher scheme was the one through which they wanted to bring in people at a lower cost, because the problem is that the reason why the contract teacher scheme came into being, I suppose, is because you can get teachers at a lower cost, at a fraction of the cost of a regular teacher. So, for example, today, I don't know about every state, but it's not too dissimilar across the states. But I can give you the example of Uttar Pradesh, that the starting salary of a grade 6 teacher on day one, if a person walks in with a BA and a B.Ed, on day one, a class 6 teacher's salary in a government school, rural government school or urban, is 76,000 something rupees, 76,300 per month. And the salary paid to a contract teacher is maybe about 1/7 of that. So there is a massive difference in the salary levels of regular teachers and contract teachers. So I think that was the biggest motivation, how to increase the teacher numbers. That this was done throughout the sort of from the mid 1990s onwards. And then, of course, more lately, I think after about 2010 or so, there have been legal challenges even before 2008, 2009. And in state after state, high courts have struck down the idea of appointing contract teachers. And in many cases, they've been regularized. So I think one of the aspects of what you're saying that I'd like to focus on is that you mentioned that there are 1.2 million teacher vacancies in the country. And that is an absolute, that's a very popularly cited number, 1.1 to 1.2 million, because in Parliament, questions are asked pretty much every year. Will the Honorable Education Minister tell us what is the total number of teacher vacancies in the country? And one can access the answers that the Ministry of Education gives in Parliament. So one can download those lists. And indeed, they show, the last time I looked for the year 2019-20, it was 1.1 million teacher vacancies. That means 11 lakh teachers that are supposedly lesser than the number required in the country. However, see, how do they decide? How is it decided? How is it identified that here is a teacher vacancy in a school? The way it's done is that the Right to Education Act's schedule gives the teacher allocation norms for schools. So for any school, any government school that has up to 60 children enrolled in it, they will get 2 teachers according to the RTE Act. And from 61 to 90 children enrolled in a school, that school will get 3 teachers. From 91 to 120 enrolled in a school, that school will get 4 teachers, and so on. And if it's a upper primary school, this was for primary schools. For upper primary schools, up to 100 children enrolled in grades 6, 7, and 8, that school will get 3 teachers. So so that's how, and then, if it is more than 100, for every 35, they'll get 1 teacher. And for more than 100, they will get a headmaster or headmistress as well. And for primary school, above 150, they will get a headmaster. These are the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act. Now, for any given school, you can see that, okay, if a school has, let's say, 55 children enrolled in it total, and if it has 2 teachers, then it has exactly the right number of teachers as per the Act. But if it has 1 teacher rather than 2, then it has a teacher shortage. It has a vacancy. But if the school were to have, let's say, 3 teachers, but only 55 students, then we would say that the school has a teacher surplus as per the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act. So that way, that's presumably how the teacher vacancies are calculated. Now, in a paper that I've done jointly with Sandeep Datta of the Delhi School of Economics, we have calculated the number of teacher deficits. And although we did it for 21 major states of India, and although for the country as a whole, it's 11 lakh teacher vacancies, as per the Ministry of Education. When we did it for these 21 major states, it was 10,35,000 vacancies. And when we said that, okay, if we apply the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act on the DICE data for every individual school, what do the teacher vacancy numbers look like? Like if we were doing it from first principles ourselves as a researcher. And the answer was about 750,000. So there is it seems that in the official estimates, there is some overestimation of the number of vacancies, which is not clear why that is. Because if you strictly apply the teacher allocation norms of the Right to Education Act to schools' own self-reported student numbers and teacher numbers, then you get this. So I think that, and then the really important thing is that what the ministry has not mentioned, what nobody has highlighted, is that just as there are deficit number of teachers in certain schools, fewer than there should be as per the norms of the RTE Act, there are other schools in which there is a surplus. And when we calculate the number of teachers that are surplus as per the Act, the vacancy, I mean, the number is about 550,000, about 546,000 surplus teachers. So if you net the two, then in these 21 major states, the number of teacher vacancies, net vacancies, is about 2.5 lakh. But then remember that there are a lot of overstated enrollments. Sometimes people call them fake enrollment. And there's a lot of data on that now. Comptroller and Auditor General's data, Midday Meal Authority's data, survey data that show that there's a lot of fake enrollment. And when Aadhaar cards have been seeded, the number of enrollments has dramatically dropped. So when you adjust for that, we have tried to do that in our paper. The number of net vacancies, instead of being 2.5 lakh net vacancies, it becomes about 1 lakh teacher surplus in those 21 major states.
Okay. Yeah,
So this is an empirical paper, and it requires, really, it requires that the government looks at this data, its own data, because all of this analysis is on DICE data, the government's own data. It's important that the government looks at the data and sees whether really there are teacher vacancies, and to what extent it may be possible to rationalize. This is a very big debate as to whether teachers, can be redeployed from teacher surplus schools, even within a district. Of course, cross-district, it may be difficult. Cross-state is impossible. But within a district, can teachers be moved from teacher surplus schools, teacher deficit schools? That in itself is a big question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. I want to now also look at incentives for teachers and versus the student outcomes. In one of your papers, you'll explore teachers' way versus student learning outcomes, and it was concluded that increasing teacher wages were associated with improved learning outcomes in private schools, but not so much in public schools due to teachers being on permanent contracts and therefore having little incentive to do better. So, given this, what do you see as the right mix of incentives, financial or otherwise, that could realistically drive improvements in education quality, not just in private schools, but also in public schools where there is not much incentives? So, how can we redesign systems to avoid improvements in student learning outcomes?
So, as an academic, my role is to, as an applied economist and as a statistician, econometrician, my role is, to look at educational data and to tease out whatever insights they contain and to bring them out to public notice through journal papers and so on. It could even be policy briefs. But, to tease out the policy implications, really, ultimately, it is policymakers that have to look at those research studies that people like me, publish. And then policymakers have to tease out, what the policy implications are of those findings. So yes, we have a paper. I have a paper with Francis Steele on performance-related pay for teachers and its impact on learning outcomes. And we do find that in the private schooling sector, the higher the teacher's wages, the higher is the learning achievement of children. But that in the government schooling sector, this is not the case. In the government schooling sector, there's not that much, there is a lot of homogeneity in teacher salaries. So there's not a lot of variation. But even that which there is, that does not lead to difference in the learning outcomes of children. I think I can point to one more thing that could be relevant, and that is that if you look at labor economics, there is a very simple but elegant theory called efficiency wage theory. And the efficiency wage theory says very simply that, it gives the example of Henry Ford in the US, who was making Ford. He was the owner of the Ford Motor Company. And in the 1960s, he, if the wage were, let's say, $1 per hour, he made it $5 per hour in one go for his staff. And the logic that he gave was that, which has been then subsequently, it's called efficiency wage theory. Basically, it says that if a person, if the threat of losing your job is a credible threat, then giving higher wages can really motivate a person to put in more effort and to do what is expected of them at the workplace. So efficiency wage theory basically says that there is a market clearing wage outside. You are working in any organization, and if you were to leave that organization, then you would be able to get whatever the market clearing wage is for persons of your kind of level of qualifications in that local labor market. So if your wage that your employer pays is way higher than that, then you would be afraid to lose your job, because if you were to leave your job, you would experience a drop in pay, because what you'll be able to get in the open labor market would be lower than what you're being paid here. But in order for your higher wage to elicit, work from you, it must be the case that the threat of dismissal or threat of removal is a credible one. Now, whereas in the private sector, in some countries, it is possible to remove people, from job if they're not really being productive, if they're not doing their work. But in the government sector, it is typically not possible. So this could be a reason why in the government sector, even if you pay people more, they're not, you're not getting a higher output. But in the private sector, when you pay people more, then efficiency wage theory kind of reasons could be operating.
Yeah.
But not everywhere, because I think that in many countries, labor laws are such that it's not really possible, even in a private sector, to remove people from jobs easily.
Right, right. And now I want to focus a bit more on the input norms. A major critical piece of the puzzle is the regulatory environment, and there's a lot of focus on input norms and infrastructure, which has become a key prerequisite for school recognition. And it often stems from safety, which is absolutely necessary and non-negotiable. But while these provisions intend to ensure safety, their implementation has also become a little rigid and one size fits all enforcement, especially after the Kumbakonam fire tragedy in Tamil Nadu. The fire and safety and the structural integrity requirements for schools were also tightened across India. And the stakeholders that we interacted with noted that many of these schools that they built were 40 to 50 years ago, and they were built in densely urban areas, semi-urban areas. So to be able to comply with the norms, the dimensions, and the requirements is one, financially prohibitive, but it's also practically not possible because they do not have the space to, say, create two exit corridors or have a 2 meter wide staircases, 15-foot open spaces. So the question then is, what principles should really guide school safety? Should there be any mechanism where they're looking at proportionate risk or context sensitivity being applied to safety norms? Yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain on that.
Okay, so this is way out of my, academic research realm. I would not, I don't have any research on this topic. I mean, as a layperson, what I can say, and also as a school, somebody who's associated with the school, I can say that there cannot be compromise with safety and security. And therefore, I think it is the job of any good government anywhere in the world, whether it be local government, state government, national government, any government anywhere in the world, it is to ensure that children are safe and secure, first and foremost. So I think if we lay on top of that the point that children have to study, if there are no government schools, because in urban areas, typically there are very, very, very few government schools, right? It's become so that mostly private schools are catering education of children in the urban areas. Very, very, very few government schools in urban areas. So, so as a result, I'm talking about certainly in the northern states. I'm not sure whether this is entirely true of the southern states. So, where the government has not been able to provide its own safe facilities, and not all government facilities are safe because sometimes they're not well kept. The infrastructure deteriorates, but the maintenance is not done. So even there are issues. It's not a debate about public versus private. It's a debate about safety, irrespective of whether it's government schools or private schools. So I think it's the job of a government to make sure that if it's not providing safe schools, within the government schooling sector, that if the private schooling is providing that, but it is in conditions that are not particularly safe, that it provides alternative spaces for them. It facilitates those schools to run in places where those spaces, that wide corridor or the wide staircases can be provided. Or it may be possible to make outdoor wide staircases, metal ones and things like that. So it is the government's job to assist. I'll give an example. When a government wants to do something, it subsidizes. For example, if the government wanted to promote the participation of secondary age girls in secondary education, in Bihar, for example, they had a scheme whereby they gave a bicycle to every girl of that age group in order to encourage girls of that secondary age group to actually attend secondary school. In the UK, in order to make homes more, sort of insulated, so when central heating is running in the home, it should not, all the heat that is being generated to keep human beings warm inside their homes should not escape through the roof because it's icy weather outside. The government gives a subsidy to homeowners, to put loft insulation in their loft. So governments do give facilitation to steer people in the right direction, in the direction of more responsible behavior or to achieve certain goals. So I think if safety and security is paramount, which it needs to be, then I think it is needed that governments facilitate. It will be a very case-to-case basis, case-by-case basis. It would need to be, but it is irreducible. It has to be done.
Right. NEP particularly has in proposed a light but tight framework, which sort of aims to move away from a lot of heavy input norms to outcome based, such as learning and improvement in pedagogy, etc. And one of the key recommendation was establishing the State School Standards Authority. My question here is, what's been the roadblock in rolling out this recommendation? Why hasn't this authority, why is the transition being so limited in Indian states?
I think, first of all, that the Chapter 8 of the National Education Policy, NEP 2020, is the least discussed part of the NEP, the school education part of the NEP. And yet, in my view, it is the elephant in the room. Improving governance of education, providing a better governance for education sector is an absolutely key thing that needs to happen in order for outcomes to be improved. And Chapter 8 of the NEP, where you talk about this, the SSSA, the State School Standards Authority, the Chapter 8 recommends the establishment of the State School Standards Authority because it recognizes that there is a conflict of interest at the moment, which vitiates the governance environment and it makes it difficult for schools to run effectively. So it notes that there is excessive centralization of power in the hands of, for example, the Directorate of Education in any state. That they are operating schools. They are also the regulator for schools. They also fund schools. they are also the assessors of children's learning outcomes in those schools. Now, if you are assessing your own performance, you're going to be likely to give good marks to yourself all the time, right?
Right.
And that is what is happening. If you look at the paper of, let's say, Abhijit Singh on Madhya Pradesh, the integrity of the state level assessment survey, state learning achievement survey, that there's a 40 percentage point difference in what the government says. Our children's achievements are 60% of the children can do the material,
Mm.
and this study shows, this is a funded study, shows that only 25% of children can do it. So there's a 35% gap. Government is giving itself very much higher marks than what an independent research study is showing. So it's not rocket science that and I think the NEP recognizes that. Chapter 8 of NEP recognizes that there's a conflict of interest. You're going to give yourself good marks, you're going to think that everything is good, and therefore it suggests breaking up that excessive centralization through the establishment of the State School Standards Authority. And that, it says, has to be an independent, autonomous body which will see to the regulation part. The Directorate of Basic Education will continue to direct schools, to operate schools, to maintain schools, and to arrange for instruction of children there. But they've established Parak for doing the assessments of learning achievement levels, and they've established they proposed the establishment of the SSSA for doing the regulatory function. But your question is, why is it that it has not been established? Why is it that SSSAs have not been established? Just in one or two states, the state exam board has been nominated as the entity that will be the SSSA, but that's not an independent agency, and therefore it's not in keeping with the spirit of the NEP Chapter 8 to name an exam board as because an exam board is an extension of the government, so it's not a truly independent agency. Your question is why? Why have they not been set up, or why have independent ones not been set up? Well, I think it's a difficult question because I think it comes up against political economy. I think there are deep-seated, entrenched, interests that would not like an independent regulator. And because independent regulator means that, at the moment, I'll give you an example. I was a member of the examinations. I was a member of an exam board of a state in India, and when I went to its first meeting after being nominated to be on it, the chairman of the committee went round asking each of the members, would have been maybe about, I can't remember, maybe about 16, 17 people, asking each one, which committee you would like to be in. There was an examinations committee, there was an affiliations committee, and I think there was one more. And person after person after person, they all said they wanted to be in the affiliations committee. And after about the seventh or eighth person or ninth person had said that, the chairman said, look, a lot of people have already volunteered to be on the affiliations committee. Could the other members kindly choose from the other two subcommittees and volunteer to be a member of one of those? And the person said, who he had requested, he said, no, my talent is only in the field of affiliation. And the rest of them almost all of them continued to say that they wanted to be in the affiliations committee. So my point is that, why is everybody wanting to be a part of the affiliations committee? And unfortunately, I don't want to say what the answer is, but that, I think, it would threaten a lot of people's, interests if it became truly independent, the regulatory body that would have to go and inspect schools to give recognition certificates, that would give no objection certificates, that would affiliate schools, and they don't want to get rid of that privilege that they have. I think that is probably the main reason why.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think we're a little short on time, so I'll just open up the floor for the audience to ask questions. You can put forth your questions in the box. So one question we had from one of our colleagues was on fee regulation. There is the latest news is that Delhi has proposed a bill which imposes 10 lakh fine and a risk of derecognition if private schools make school hikes arbitrarily. So, and in many states, there is fee regulatory commission that sort of regulates the fees of private schools. I want to understand on what basis do they determine what is a reasonable fee and what is an arbitrary hike? Who decides and on what's the basis of it all?
Well, I can cite from the example of Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh came up with is called the Uttar Pradesh Self-Financed Schools Fee Regulation Act 2018. And uh, there had been cases where some schools had, in various years, different schools maybe, or maybe some schools every year, had been raising fee in a way that led to student protests, or rather parental protests. I remember one case of a school that had raised its fee by I think 33% or 30% or 33%, I can't remember. And the parents objected, and the school said that we are installing air conditioners in the school. That is why the fees had to rise so much. Anyway, there would have been, whatever justifications schools may have given and so forth, but there was concern around very high fee increases. And this fee regulation, the bill that came, it was put out for consultation, and then a few months later, it was enacted into an act. So you've asked what is the basis, what could be a good basis. And I think the Uttar Pradesh Fee Regulation Act has been held up as an example of a quite a good Fee Regulation Act, because it operates on the principle that at the time of admission, you can charge whatever fee you like. As a school, at the time of a child's admission, the child can be asked for whatever the school fee is for new admittees for that class, and that is okay. But once a child has been admitted at whatever fee level they've chosen to take admission in your school at, from that you cannot increase it by more than a given percentage every year. And the act prescribes what that percentage is. It says that it cannot be more than the CPI plus 5%, the change in CPI plus 5%, the consumer prices index, the inflation rate plus up to 5% more. So you are allowed to increase fee from the level at which you enroll the child by up to 5% plus the inflation rate. So and what it has done is that it has asked all schools to lump together all the compulsory fees into one single fee head called composite fee. And that's the compulsory fee. It allows certain fee heads. It prescribes that a school can charge form and prospectus fee. It can charge a caution money or, refundable, caution money. And thirdly, it can charge a composite fee. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly, it could be 6 monthly. But the point is that you can charge a composite fee. These are the components that it allows. Apart from these, it allows a component called optional fee. Optional fee you can raise as much as you like or as little as you like. There's no bar of CPI plus 5% because it is optional. If you cannot afford horse riding, your school is offering horse riding and it wants to raise its fee by 15% on horse riding or transport, which is again, it's optional, or school meals may be optional. That for those things you can raise your fee, and that doesn't come under this stricture. But the composite fee has to be that which is mandatory fee, that you cannot raise by more than CPI plus 5%.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question which says, are there any international models of best practices that India can learn from in regulating low-cost private schools?
Well, in other countries, I think that there are two types of. I would like to say two things to this. One is that in countries like European countries, those who go to independent schools or private schools, as we call in India, the private schools, the independent schools are expensive. And they're expensive because the parent has to pay for it herself or himself. I can give the example of the United Kingdom. 7% of children in the UK study in independent schools. 93% of children study by choice in publicly funded schools. And the quality, perceived quality of publicly funded schools is good. And that is why, even though quite a much higher proportion than 7% of the population could afford independent school fees, they don't go there. They go to government schools, government funded schools. Now, so it's to do with they don't have budget private schools. They have the high fee elite independent schools. But then the second point I'd like to say is that there are countries in which there are low fee private schools, and where, for example, if you look at Mexico, if you look at Colombia, places like that, they have got schools which are called voucher schools or charter schools. So here, government funds not the school, but it funds the child. That means it gives a school voucher to a child, to the parent of a child, and says that you can spend this voucher at any school of your choice. So whichever school the parent perceives to be a good school in their locality, they can go and admit their child in that, and the school voucher pays for it. So the parent is not having to pay, but the parent has the choice of which school they go to. And the voucher pays for that child's education. And the voucher value can also be supplemented. Supposing I want my child to go, supposing in India, of course, there are so many different levels of different types of fee levels of different types of schools. There are slum private schools, and there are really elite, boarding schools that are private schools with the whole range of fee from maybe about 75 rupees per month or 100 rupees per month, all the way up to maybe, 1 lakh rupees a month. So, the value of the voucher can be supplemented by a parent to send their child to a quote unquote higher quality school, or at least a higher fee school if they so want. So that's a voucher school, and it gives parents the autonomy to do this, to have choice. And it also drives up standards in schools. It is not because of the fact that schools will vie with each other to attract more vouchers so that they can encash them with government. So there is competition between schools as well. There's a financial incentive as well. There are charter schools as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Geeta Gandhi. As we close, I would like to extend my gratitude towards you coming over and sharing your thoughtful insights. The conversation has highlighted the complexity of the challenges that we face. That the challenges that the budget schools face, and there are also opportunities that we see that can be done better. Thank you so much for all your insights. We're going to take forward those insights and sort of incorporate in the ongoing work that we're doing on Edupreneur project. So thank you once again for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Nessie Solomon and Afia Biju. Thank you for having me, and best wishes.
Thank you, ma'am. It was really an insightful session. And thank you, Nisi ma'am, for such a very thoughtful, thought-provoking discussion that we had done today. And as a person, I can say that the day that we were started to doing the research, my guides were consistently telling me that your book will be my foundation for this research. I'm sure that this is for everyone who start to do the research on school education. And I'm sure that today's dialogue sparks further thought and action toward building a more inclusive and learning focused system. And thank you so much for accepting our request and coming here. So thank you so much, ma'am, Gida ma'am and Missy ma'am. And lastly, thank you, ma'am. Okay. And thank you for all the participants who joined us today. And lastly, we invite you to keep following CPPR's social media channels for more updates, insights, and details about our upcoming events. And thank you all once again. Thank you.